My stepbrother slapped me in a hospital hallway while I was still bleeding from a miscarriage, shoved papers in my face, and told me to sign away my father's company or get out of his life for good. 48 hours later, I was locked out of my own home, my mother's photo shattered in a box on the lawn, and everyone thought I was too weak to fight back. They didn't know my father had left a second will. They didn't know he believed someone had been slowly poisoning him. And they definitely didn't know I was about to walk into their office and take back everything they stole, including the future of 43 families who had trusted our name. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is what happened when they thought I would stay silent. Chapter 1. The day everything broke. I woke up to the smell of disinfectant and the steady electronic beeping that told me my heart was still doing its job, even if the rest of me felt like it had fallen apart. The doctor had already left. The nurse had spoken softly, the way people do when they are afraid that normal volume might break you. A few days ago, I had gone into that hospital believing I was going to lose a pregnancy. I did not expect to lose my sense of safety along with it. My body felt hollow and heavy at the same time. Every movement came with a dull ache that reminded me I had not imagined what happened. I stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to keep my breathing even. I told myself that once I was discharged, I would go home, take a shower, sleep in my father's house, and let my mind catch up later. I did not know home was already gone. I heard raised voices before I saw him, footsteps that moved too fast for a hospital hallway, a familiar tone sharpened by impatience and entitlement. Caleb. My stepbrother appeared at the doorway of the waiting area with a thick folder tucked under his arm. He did not look at the nurse. He did not ask how I was. His eyes went straight to me, narrowed, calculating, already irritated that I was not standing up to greet him. "You look awful," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. I did not answer. I did not have the energy to manage his tone or his presence. I focused on the armrest beneath my fingers, grounding myself in something solid. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me without asking. He flipped open the folder and slid several papers onto the small table between us. "Dad made his wishes clear," he said. "We need to take care of this today." I glanced at the top page. Legal language, company letterhead, Whitmore Construction, LLC. My father's name printed at the bottom of a document I had never seen before. "What is this?" I asked. "It is simple," Caleb said. "You sign, you step aside. We avoid any unnecessary complications." I told him I needed time. I told him I had just been released from medical observation. I told him I would speak to a lawyer. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped into something sharper. "There is no need for lawyers. Dad wanted this handled quietly. He trusted me to do it." I looked at him then. Really looked. His suit was too crisp for a hospital visit. His phone buzzed in his hand like this was just another meeting on his calendar. There was no grief on his face, no hesitation. I said no. That was when he lost control. His chair scraped back. His hand came down on the table hard enough to make the papers slide. People turned to look. A nurse started to step closer. "You do not get to do this," he said. "You do not get to complicate things because you are emotional." I stood up too fast, and the room tilted. He grabbed my arm, hard. Not enough to leave a mark, but enough to remind me that he could. Someone shouted. Security arrived. The nurse was suddenly between us, her voice firm now. Hospital security called the police. Caleb stepped back and adjusted his jacket as if nothing had happened. When the officers arrived, he spoke calmly. I sat back down because my legs could not hold me anymore. The report was quick. Disturbance, minor assault, no visible injuries, civil family dispute. Caleb was taken aside briefly and then released the same afternoon. No handcuffs, no real consequences. The officers explained it in the way people explain things they know you cannot change. It was not a serious charge. He had no prior record. He was allowed to leave. By the time I signed my discharge papers, he was already gone. I left the hospital alone. The sky was gray and low, the kind that presses down on you. I drove straight to my father's house, the one he bought in 2005, the place that had been steady my entire adult life. After my divorce in 2021, he had insisted I stay there until I found my footing again. The driveway was empty when I arrived. The porch light was off. Something felt wrong before I even reached the door. My key did not work. I tried again, thinking my hands were still shaking. The lock did not turn. I noticed then that the handle was new. The deadbolt was different. The realization hit me slowly and then all at once. The locks had been changed. I knocked. No answer. I walked around to the back. Same thing. I peered through the window and saw boxes stacked near the door. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should take your things and go." I stepped back and nearly tripped over a cardboard box sitting on the lawn. It was open. Inside were clothes I recognized, my shoes, photo frames, papers, everything I had not taken with me to the hospital. I called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes. They were polite, they listened, they nodded. One of them explained that because my father had passed and there was a dispute over the property, it was considered a civil matter. They could not force entry. They suggested I contact the court. "Illegal eviction?" I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. They exchanged a look. One officer shrugged slightly. It would need to be resolved legally. I watched their car pull away. I stood in the yard surrounded by pieces of my life. I opened another box and felt something tear open inside my chest. My mother's belongings, letters she had written before she died, a scarf she wore every winter. The glass frame around her photo was shattered, her face split by a crack that ran straight through her smile. That was when I sat down on the grass and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of crying that comes from being emptied out. I had not even buried my father yet. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. No one came over. I couldn't blame them. As the sun began to set, I packed what I could into my car. I drove away without knowing where I was going to sleep that night. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Caleb. "You should not make this harder than it needs to be." I did not reply. I parked a few blocks away and turned off the engine. The silence inside the car felt heavy. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and tried to understand how everything had shifted so quickly. If this had truly been my father's wish, why had it happened this way? Why the hospital? Why the pressure? Why the violence? I told myself there was a simple explanation, that grief made people act badly, that I was reading too much into it because I was exhausted and hurting. But even then, sitting alone in my car with the last of my belongings in the back seat, I could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I was not ready to believe it yet. I still wanted to believe that my father would never have allowed this. I started the car and drove into the dark, carrying the question with me, not knowing that it was the first crack in a story far larger than I could see. Chapter 2. The House I No Longer Recognized. The next place I stopped was Ruth Keller's house because it was the only address that felt like it belonged to my father as much as the one they had locked me out of. Ruth lived in a modest 2-story home on a quiet street outside town. The porch light was on when I pulled up, as if she had been waiting there all evening. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. Ruth was 74, small and straight-backed, with silver hair pulled into a neat twist and eyes that seemed to measure everything before she spoke. She took one look at my face and reached for my hand. "Come in," she said. "You're not sleeping in your car." The warmth of her entryway hit me first. A faint scent of coffee, clean laundry, something baked earlier in the day. I stepped inside and my shoulders sagged as if my body had been holding itself upright out of pure stubbornness. Ruth closed the door and locked it, then checked the deadbolt like it was a habit. She led me into the living room and turned on a lamp. The soft light made the place feel safe in a way I had not felt since the hospital. "Sit," she said. "I will get you something warm." I tried to protest. She ignored me. When she came back, she set a mug in front of me and a small plate with toast I did not remember asking for. Then she sat across from me and folded her hands. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. So I did. The hospital, Caleb, the papers, the push of his hand on my arm, the police calling it a disturbance and nothing more, the new locks, my mother's shattered photo. The way the officer had said "civil matter," like that phrase could cover everything. Ruth listened without interrupting. Her face did not change much, but I noticed the muscle in her jaw tighten at certain parts. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Thomas was careful," she said, "careful in ways most people never understand. He did not make sudden decisions with his money. He did not change legal documents on a whim. If Caleb is waving papers in your face, that does not mean your father wanted them signed." I stared at the toast and realized my hands were shaking. "Caleb said Dad made his wishes clear," I said. Ruth nodded once, slowly, like she was already sorting through possibilities in her mind. "Caleb says many things," she said. "He has always believed if he says them loudly enough, the world will bend." I swallowed hard. "I did not even get to bury my father," I said. Ruth's eyes softened. "I know," she said. "I am sorry, Eleanor." The use of my name made something twist in my chest. At home, in my father's house, I had been Eleanor. In the hospital, I had been a patient. With Caleb, I had been an obstacle. With Ruth, I felt like a person again. After a while, she asked me about the pieces Caleb had always used to justify himself, the narrative he had been living in since we were young. I told her the same things I would tell anyone who asked. "Dad married Marilyn in 2010, I said. "I was already grown. I had my own place, my own job. I was polite. I tried to be." Ruth nodded. "Caleb had been in your father's life before Marilyn," she said. "Yes," I said. "Dad met Marilyn when Caleb was a kid. 12, maybe. Thomas took him in, paid for school, gave him a position at the company when he got older. And Caleb never forgave the world for the fact that you were blood," Ruth said quietly. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. I also knew there was another question hanging over me, one I had heard in the silence of my car and in the imaginary comments of strangers who would later hear my story and want to poke holes in it. "Ruth," I said, my voice low, "I need to say something now so it does not become a thing later." She tilted her head. "I was divorced in 2021, I said. "I was pregnant by someone who is not part of this. He has nothing to do with my father's money. He is not a factor in any of it." Ruth nodded, calm. "That is your business," she said. "Anyone who thinks it matters more than what Caleb did is looking the wrong direction." The way she said it made me feel steadier, like a line had been drawn around what was relevant and what was not. That night, I slept in the guest room. I slept badly. My body still felt raw, and every time I shifted, my abdomen tightened and reminded me of the hospital. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of keys that didn't fit and doors that wouldn't open. In the morning, Ruth was already up. She moved around the kitchen with purpose, phone in one hand, a notebook in the other. When she saw Lee, she pointed to a chair. "Eat," she said. "Then we talk." I sat. I ate a few bites because she watched until I did. Then she sat across from me and folded her hands. "I want you to understand something about your father," she said. She reached into a drawer and pulled out an old photo. My father and Ruth at a company picnic, both of them younger, his arm around her shoulders, her smile bright and unguarded. "I was with Whittemore Construction for 20 years, she said, "from 2001 until I retired in 2021. I saw every season the company went through. I saw Thomas build it with his hands and his conscience. He cared about his people. He cared about the numbers, yes, but he also cared about what those numbers represented. I nodded, remembering my father shaking hands with employees by name, remembering how he brought food to job sites and stayed late to make sure people got home safe. Ruth set the photo down. "You see," she said, "if Caleb is trying to strip you and everyone else, then he's not just taking property, he's taking a legacy. And that's something Thomas would not hand over lightly." Later that afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. Ruth glanced out the window and went still. "Henry Walsh," she said. I recognized the name, an old neighbor of my father, the kind of man who always waved but rarely stopped to talk. Ruth opened the door before he could knock. Henry stepped inside slowly, cap in his hands, eyes darting around like he wasn't sure he should be there. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice carried a sadness that felt real. "Thank you," I said. He shifted his weight. He glanced at Ruth like he needed her permission to continue. Ruth folded her arms. "Tell us what you came to tell us, Henry." Henry swallowed. "I don't want to make trouble," he said, "but I keep thinking about those last months. Thomas wasn't himself. He started acting like someone was watching him." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" I asked. Henry looked down at the floor. "He said his phone wasn't safe. He asked to use mine once, and one time he showed me a little bottle of pills. He said they were the old ones, and he said the new ones made him feel tired, like his heart was trying to pull him under." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Did he say who gave him the new prescription?" Henry hesitated. "He said Marilyn handled a lot of his appointments. He said Caleb was always around when the mail came. And he said," Henry paused, then went on, "he said Caleb kept telling him to rest, to stop worrying, that Eleanor couldn't handle it anyway." I felt a flash of heat behind my eyes. "Did he say Caleb?" I asked. Henry nodded. "He said Caleb. He said he didn't trust him, not anymore." Ruth asked a few more questions, careful ones, the kind that seemed casual but not. Dates, times, whether Henry had ever seen paperwork delivered, whether Thomas had ever mentioned a lawyer. Henry couldn't give us everything, but he gave us enough to make my stomach twist tighter. When he left, Ruth locked the door again. "You see," she said, "this is not just about a will. It never was." That evening, I went with Ruth to pick up my prescriptions. My body still moved like it was learning how to be in the world again. I kept my head down in the pharmacy line and tried not to meet anyone's eyes. On the way back, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror and stayed there. At first, I told myself it was nothing, a neighbor, someone going the same way. But when I turned onto a side street, the car turned too. When I made another turn slower, the car stayed behind. My palms went damp on the steering wheel. "Ruth," I said quietly. She looked up from the passenger seat. "What?" "Someone is following us," I said. Ruth's posture changed immediately. She didn't panic. She simply reached for her phone and watched the mirrors with me. "Take the next right," she said, "then go straight, then turn into the gas station on Maple." I did exactly that. The car followed, then slowed as we pulled into the station. It rolled past, paused at the edge of the lot, then continued on. I sat there with my heart hammering. Ruth exhaled slowly. "All right," she said. "That's enough." That night, I found an envelope tucked under Ruth's front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single photo printed on cheap paper. It was Ruth's house. The porch, the windows, the angle from the street, as if someone had stood in the dark and taken it quietly. My throat grew dry. Ruth took it from my hand and studied it. Then she set it on the counter and picked up her phone. "We're documenting everything," she said. Before she could dial, my phone rang, an unknown number. Ruth held up a hand. "Put it on speaker." I pressed the button. "Eleanor," Marilyn's voice said, smooth as if she were calling to offer condolences. "I hear you've been staying with Ruth." Ruth's eyes went cold. "What do you want?" I said. A pause, then Marilyn spoke again, soft and careful. "I want you to be wise," she said. "You've been through a lot, loss, stress. It's not good for you to keep fighting. Sometimes letting go is the healthiest choice." My stomach turned at the way she said health. Chapter 3. What my father was trying to tell me. The next place I went was Ruth Keller's house, because it was the only address that still felt anchored to my father instead of to whatever Caleb and Marilyn were turning his life into. Ruth lived in a quiet residential pocket outside town, the kind of neighborhood where people trimmed their hedges on Saturdays and knew each other's dogs by name. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was already on. She opened the door before I could knock. She looked at me for a long second, took in my face, my posture, the way I was holding myself together by habit alone. "Come inside," she said. "You're not sleeping in your car." The warmth of the house hit me immediately. The smell of coffee, clean linens, something faintly sweet baking earlier that day. My shoulders dropped before I realized they were tense. Ruth closed the door and turned the lock with a decisive click. She led me into the living room, turned on a lamp, and disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back, she set a mug in front of me and a plate with toast I had not asked for. "Eat," she said, "then tell me everything." So I did. The hospital, Caleb showing up with papers, the way he said "my father's wishes" like they were a weapon, the shove, the police calling it a disturbance, the new locks, the boxes in the yard, my mother's broken photo. Ruth listened without interrupting. Her face stayed composed, but I saw her jaw tighten when I described the hospital and again when I described the locks. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Thomas was careful," she said, "careful in ways most people mistake for control. He did not change legal documents impulsively. He did not make big decisions without warning the people affected by them." "Caleb said it was what my dad wanted," I said. Ruth nodded once. "Caleb has always believed confidence can replace truth." I stared into my mug, watching the steam curl. "There's something else I need to say now, before it turns into speculation," I said quietly. Ruth looked at me steadily. "I was divorced in 2021. The pregnancy I lost wasn't tied to any inheritance or asset. The father isn't involved. He has nothing to do with my dad's estate or the company." Ruth did not blink. "That's your private life," she said. "Anyone who tries to use it to discredit you is reaching." The certainty in her voice steadied me more than I expected. That night I slept in the guest room, or I tried to. My body was still recovering, and every shift reminded me of the hospital. When I did drift off, I dreamed of keys that fit no doors. In the morning, Ruth was already awake. She sat at the dining table with a notebook open, glasses perched low on her nose. "I worked at Whitmore Construction from 2001 until I retired in 2021, she said without preamble. "I saw every season of that company. Thomas did not build it to be stripped." I nodded. I remembered my father bringing food to job sites, remembering employees' anniversaries, checking on people's kids. "If Caleb is rushing you to sign," she continued, "it's because he doesn't want time. Time exposes patterns." Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Ruth looked through the window and stiffened. "Henry Walsh," she said. I recognized the name, a neighbor of my father's for years, quiet, observant. Henry stepped inside, cap in his hands. "I'm sorry about Thomas," he said. "I've been thinking about him a lot." Ruth gestured for him to sit. Henry hesitated, then spoke. "The last year wasn't right. He started acting like someone was watching him, asked to use my phone once, said his didn't feel safe." My skin prickled. "He showed me his pills, said the new ones made him tired, said the old ones felt different. And he mentioned Caleb by name, said he didn't trust him anymore." Ruth asked careful questions, dates, timing, whether Thomas mentioned appointments or paperwork. Henry couldn't give us everything, but he gave enough to make my stomach knot. After he left, Ruth locked the door again. "This isn't just a will dispute," she said. "It never was." That evening, Ruth and I went to pick up my prescriptions. On the way back, headlights appeared in my mirror and stayed there. When I turned, the car turned. When I slowed, it slowed. "Ruth?" I said. She straightened. "Take the next right, then the gas station." I did. The car followed, then rolled past us slowly before disappearing. We sat in silence for a moment. "That was a message," Ruth said. When we got back to her house, an envelope was tucked under the door, no stamp. Inside was a printed photo of her porch taken from the street. Ruth studied it, then reached for her phone. "We document everything," she said. Before she could dial, my phone rang. Unknown number. Ruth nodded for me to answer on speaker. "Eleanor," Marilyn's voice said smoothly, "I hear you staying with Ruth." "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to be wise. You've been through enough. Fighting won't heal you." "Caleb assaulted me in a hospital. He threw my things out of my home." A pause. "Family matters get complicated. The law will handle what it needs to, but you don't want to make enemies you can't afford." Ruth leaned toward the phone. "Do not contact Eleanor again," she said calmly. Another pause, then Marilyn's tone sharpened just slightly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ruth." The call ended. "They're nervous," Ruth said. "People who are calm don't send warnings." The next morning, Ruth pulled out old files from her personal records, spreadsheets, notes. She moved through them with practiced focus. Then her expression changed. "Eleanor," she said. I stood beside her. On the screen were transactions that didn't fit payroll or known vendors. "Money moving out," she said, "not in a way Thomas would approve. And look at the dates. They lined up with when my father's health began to decline." The papers Caleb had shoved at me weren't the truth. They were a distraction, and whoever was hiding behind them was hiding far more than a signature. Chapter 4. I let them think they'd won. I stopped reacting after that. That was the first real change. Once I understood how much was being hidden, panic stopped helping. Grief stopped helping. What helped was structure. Daniel Brooks met me the next morning in his office, the same conference room where my father had once sat across from him and joked about never retiring. Daniel was 41, sharp-eyed, and careful with every word, especially now. "You did the right thing bringing everything through Ruth," he said as he opened the secured file. "Chain of custody is clean. If anyone challenges this, we're protected." I watched his hands as he reviewed the documents. The will, the financial records, the timeline Ruth had reconstructed. "They rushed," he added. "That's their mistake. People who rush leave fingerprints." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Enough to stop them?" Daniel leaned back. "It's enough to start, but we don't move until we're certain the next step doesn't tip them off." That was when he introduced me to Detective Lauren Miles. She was 46, calm, and looked like someone who had seen every version of denial there was. She specialized in elder abuse and financial crimes. She shook my hand firmly and did not soften her tone. "Your father's case fits a pattern," she said. "Slow medication manipulation, financial control, isolation. These cases rarely come with one big smoking gun. They come with accumulation." She slid a report across the table. Independent medical review, digoxin levels, long-term exposure beyond therapeutic range. "It doesn't prove intent by itself," she said, "but it supports suspicion, especially when paired with financial incentive." I felt my jaw tighten. "So what do we do?" Lauren looked at Daniel, then back at me. "We let them keep talking." That was the part that scared me. Daniel explained it carefully. Pennsylvania was a two-party consent state. No secret recordings, no tricks that would poison evidence. "We don't trap them," he said. "We give them space to confirm what they already believe." "And what do they believe?" I asked. "That they've won," Lauren said. So I let them believe it. I waited 3 days, long enough for the silence to feel real. Then I emailed Caleb. I kept it short, no accusations, no legal language. "I'm tired. I can't fight anymore. I just want this over." He replied within an hour. "We can meet. Let's be adults." The meeting was set at Daniel's office, neutral ground. Lawyers present, email confirmations saved, every step documented. Caleb arrived smiling. He looked relaxed, confident, like someone who thought the storm had passed. Marilyn came with him, polished and composed. Ava Price followed a few minutes later, younger, overdressed, checking her phone like she was bored. Ava was 29, Caleb's girlfriend. She carried herself like someone who had recently discovered money. Daniel opened the meeting. This is a discussion to resolve estate matters, nothing more. Caleb leaned back. Finally. I kept my shoulders slumped, my voice quiet. I don't have the energy for this. I just want to move on. Marilyn's lips curved into something almost kind. That's for the best, Eleanor. Caleb slid a document across the table. Sign this and we'll make sure you get something fair. Daniel glanced at it. This isn't the will on record. Caleb waved a hand. Details. I looked down. I let my hands shake. I just don't want this to get ugly, I said. Caleb laughed softly. It won't, as long as you cooperate. Marilyn spoke then, smooth as glass. Your father's will would have wanted peace. That almost broke me. Almost. Daniel intervened. Before anything is signed, we need clarity on certain financial issues. Caleb stiffened. Like what? Vendor payments? Company funds? Caleb shrugged. Standard operations. Ava looked up from her phone. You mean the travel stuff? She said brightly. The Maldives trip was technically a business write-off. Caleb shot her a look. Too late. Daniel's pen paused. Maldives? Ava smiled, oblivious. Yeah, Caleb said it was fine. Company's doing great. Silence settled. Marilyn's expression tightened just a fraction. Daniel looked at Caleb. You want to explain that? Caleb cleared his throat. She doesn't understand accounting. Lauren watched quietly from the corner, introduced only as a consultant. Daniel continued. And the 401k discrepancies? Marilyn's voice sharpened. Those are temporary. Temporary for 43 employees. Caleb leaned forward. Look, we're restructuring. Sometimes money moves. Lauren spoke the first time. Money doesn't move out of retirement accounts without consequences. Caleb frowned. Who are you? Someone who cares about elder abuse, she said calmly. The air changed. Ava shifted in her chair. Caleb, you said this was handled. Caleb shot her another look. Not now. Marilyn folded her hands. This meeting is going off track. Daniel nodded. It is, because you've just confirmed misuse of funds in front of council. Caleb stood. This is ridiculous. I spoke softly. So is locking me out of my home. He froze. You didn't need to do that, I added. You could have waited, but you rushed. Marilyn's eyes met mine. There was no kindness left in them now, only calculation. You think you're clever, I said. No, I think my father was. Ava looked between them, confusion dawning. What is happening? Daniel closed the file. What's happening is that this conversation is documented, and you've given us more than enough to proceed. Caleb's confidence cracked, just slightly. This isn't over, he said. I know, it's just starting. They left shortly after. Ava followed last, her face pale, her phone forgotten on the table. Lauren picked it up with gloves. Lifestyle evidence, she said. Daniel locked the door behind them. That went better than expected, he said quietly. I sat back, heart pounding, but steady. How long? I asked. Lauren met my eyes. Not long. One more step, and timing matters. That night, I stood outside the building alone for a moment before getting into my car. They thought I had surrendered. They thought exhaustion meant defeat. They didn't realize I had stopped fighting emotionally and started moving strategically. And now I was walking into the final meeting with control I didn't know I still had. Chapter 5. The Price They Never Expected to Pay. The building looked smaller than it used to, or maybe I was just standing straighter. Whitmore Construction had always felt like an extension of my father, solid, practical, quietly dependable. That morning, it felt like a courtroom without robes, a place where the truth was about to be weighed carefully instead of shouted. Daniel had insisted on the setting, controlled, documented, lawful in every detail. No surprises, he said. Real justice doesn't need theatrics. By the time I arrived, the pieces were already in motion. The state financial investigators were inside, not storming rooms, not drawing attention. They had arrived earlier under the pretense of a routine compliance review. Detective Lauren Miles was there as well, dressed like a consultant, not a threat. Clipboards instead of handcuffs, questions instead of accusations. Caleb and Marilyn walked in together, confident enough to be late. Caleb smiled when he saw me. It was the same smile he wore in the hospital, the one that assumed I would fold if pressed hard enough. "Morning," he said. "Didn't expect this to turn into such a production." It didn't. It turned into accountability. He laughed softly and took his seat at the head of the conference table, a position he had claimed quickly once my father was gone. Marilyn sat beside him, posture perfect, hands folded, eyes sharp. Daniel opened the meeting with procedural calm, introductions, purpose, scope. "This is an internal review requested by the estate and supported by state oversight," he said. "We're here to clarify records, not debate feelings." Caleb leaned back. "Fine, let's clarify." I had rehearsed my questions carefully, not to sound clever, but to sound reasonable. Questions people answered when they believed the answers couldn't hurt them. "When did you start authorizing payments to Brightline Consulting?" I asked, sliding a printed ledger across the table. Caleb glanced at it. "A couple years ago. They handled external strategy." "And where are they based?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second. "Out of state." "Which state?" I pressed. Marilyn answered smoothly. "Nevada." Lauren looked up from her notes. "Our records show no registered consulting firm under that name in Nevada during that period." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It was subcontracted." "Through which entity?" I asked. Silence stretched. I moved on. "Can you explain why employee retirement contributions were delayed while executive reimbursements increased?" Caleb scoffed. "Cash flow timing." Cash flow timing? For 43 employees? Over multiple quarters? Marilyn leaned forward. "You're mischaracterizing normal business adjustments." Lauren spoke then, calm but firm. "Normal adjustments don't reroute protected funds. That triggers mandatory reporting." Caleb's confidence started to fray. "This feels like an ambush," he said. Daniel shook his head. "It's a review. You were notified." I watched Marilyn closely. She hadn't spoken in a while. When she did, her voice was precise. "This company survived because of us. Thomas was sick, decisions had to be made." I met her gaze. He wasn't incapable. "He was declining," she replied. "You weren't here to see it." "I was," I said quietly. "He just didn't let you see what he was still capable of." That was when I placed the copy of the will on the table, dated March 2023. Caleb's eyes flicked to it, then away. "That document is invalid," he said. Daniel slid the notarization forward. "It's valid, and it supersedes the one you presented." Marilyn's expression finally cracked. "This is absurd," she said. "You're trying to rewrite history." "No, I'm restoring it." Lauren signaled to one of the state investigators, who stood and addressed the room. "We're expanding this review to include potential elder exploitation and financial misappropriation," he said evenly. "This will involve a temporary suspension of executive authority pending outcome." Caleb stood abruptly. "You can't do that." "Yes," the investigator replied, "we can." The air in the room shifted. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet realignment of power. Marilyn reached for Caleb's arm. "Sit down," she whispered sharply. Eva Price wasn't there that day. Daniel had advised against inviting her again. Her absence spoke loudly enough. The review continued for hours. Questions, documents, confirmations. No shouting. No denying strong enough to undo numbers on a page. By late afternoon, Caleb no longer sat at the head of the table. The investigators concluded with next steps: formal notices, asset controls, and referral to federal regulators regarding retirement fund violations. Marilyn was informed separately that her financial history would be reviewed in full, including insurance claims tied to multiple marriages across state lines. Her composure vanished then, replaced with a tight fury she couldn't aim anywhere safely. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as the room cleared. I nodded. "No, it's just honest now." When it was done, when the building emptied and the quiet returned, I walked through the office floor alone. Desks, photos, hard hats hung neatly on pegs. This place was still full of people's lives, and it would stay that way. The company was placed under interim management. The retirement funds were frozen, audited, and eventually restored. Employees were notified carefully, truthfully, without panic. Natalie called me later, crying with relief. "They're safe. You did it." I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Weeks later, after the formal charges were filed and the estate was settled properly, I stood at my father's grave with Ruth beside me. No reporters, no speeches. "I kept my promise," I said quietly. Ruth nodded. "You did more than that. You finished his work." I left flowers and stepped back, feeling something close to peace settle in my chest. Justice didn't come with fireworks. It came with paperwork, patience, and the willingness to be uncomfortable longer than the people who were counting on silence. And now, when I think about everything that happened, I wonder what I would have chosen if the truth had been quieter, if walking away had been easier. So I'll leave you with the question I had to answer. If you were in my place, would you choose the comfort of silence, or would you face the truth, even when it costs you everything you thought you needed to survive?